My name is William Harper. I am 95 years old. And before I die, I need to tell you something most people never realize until it's too late. 3 nights ago, my granddaughter came to see me in this hospital room. It was 2 in the morning. She sat beside my bed, hands shaking. And she said something that made my heart sink. She said, "Grandpa, I think I've lived my whole life wrong." Now here's the strange part. Emily has a good job, a beautiful apartment in Seattle, a life most people would call successful. But as she sat there in the quiet of that room, she started crying. Not loud crying, the kind people do when they're trying very hard to stay strong. And then she said something I have heard from many young people, something that sounds noble but hides a dangerous trap. She said, "I just wanted to make my family proud." I looked at her for a long moment because I recognized that sentence immediately. I said the exact same thing when I was her age, and that sentence quietly changed the direction of my entire life. So I told her something that shocked her, something most parents, teachers, and friends will never tell you. I said, "Emily, that sentence ruins more lives than failure ever will." Because the most dangerous lie young people believe is not told by enemies. It is told by the people who love them most. And if you don't understand that lie early enough, you can wake up one day at 95 years old like me and realize you spent decades living someone else's life. So sit with me for a moment. Let an old man tell you the story of the biggest mistake he ever made. Because I didn't ruin my life with bad decisions. I ruined it with good intentions. And it all started when I was 26 years old in Portland, Oregon. Back then, I wanted to be a painter. When you reach 95, sleep becomes a strange thing. Sometimes you sleep for hours. Sometimes you wake up at 2 in the morning and your mind begins wandering through 70 years of memories. That night, I was awake. The hospital hallway was quiet. The lights were dim. Somewhere down the corridor, a machine was beeping slowly. Then the door opened. Emily stepped inside. She tried to smile when she saw me. But you learn something about people after living this long. You learn the difference between a real smile and a brave one. She pulled a chair next to my bed and sat down. For a minute, neither of us spoke. We just listened to the rain against the window. Finally, she said, "Grandpa, can I ask you something?" I nodded. When you're 95, people ask you questions differently, not because you're smarter, but because they think you might know something about time. Emily looked down at her hands. Then she said quietly, "I think I've done everything right, but something still feels wrong." She told me about her life, her job as a designer in Seattle, her apartment overlooking the water, her friends who all said she was doing great. But then she said something that made the room feel smaller. She said, "I wake up every morning feeling tired, and I don't know why." Now, that sentence might not sound dramatic, but I have heard it many times in my life, from young lawyers, from doctors, from businessmen who made millions. It's the sentence people say when they have followed the path everyone approved of and somehow lost themselves along the way. Emily wiped her eyes. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. I just wanted to make my family proud. I leaned back against the pillow because suddenly I wasn't looking at my granddaughter anymore. I was looking at myself, 40, 50, 60 years ago. I took a slow breath and I told her something that surprised her, something most people never hear until it's too late. I said, Emily, that sentence sounds beautiful, but it can quietly destroy a life. She looked at me, confused. So I told her a story I had not spoken about in years, a story that began in 1956, back when I was 26 and believed the world was wide open. Back then, I wanted to be a painter. In 1956, Portland felt like a quiet city at the edge of the world. The morning smelled like rain and pine trees. Streetcars rattled down wet tracks, and Mount Hood stood in the distance like a silent guardian watching over the city. I was 26 years old, and I believed my life was just beginning. Back then, I lived in a small upstairs room in my mother's house. It wasn't much. Just a narrow bed, a wooden desk, and a single window that looked toward the river. But the walls of that room were covered with paintings, paintings. Some were landscapes, fog rolling across the Columbia River, snow on Mount Hood, the orange glow of Portland sunsets. Others were sketches, faces of people on streetcars, men drinking coffee in small diners, a charcoal portrait of my mother sitting quietly by the kitchen window. I painted every night after work. Not because anyone asked me to, not because anyone paid me. I painted because something inside me felt calm when I held a brush. When you are young, there are moments when the world feels wide open. You believe there are 1,000 possible lives waiting for you. And for a while, I believed mine would be built around art. Then one evening, everything changed. My mother, Margaret, came into my room. She stood quietly for a long moment, looking at the paintings on the walls. My mother was a strong woman, but she was also a woman shaped by hard years. She grew up during the Great Depression. She had seen neighbors lose their homes. She had seen families go hungry. To her, security wasn't comfort. It was survival. She turned to me and asked a simple question. William, what exactly do you plan to do with all of this? I told her the truth. I said I wanted to become a painter. Not famous, not rich. Just someone who spent his life creating things that mattered. She listened without interrupting. Then she sat down on the edge of my bed, and after a long silence, she said something that sounded perfectly reasonable. William, passion is a beautiful thing, but passion doesn't pay the electric bill. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cruel. She was afraid. Afraid I would struggle. Afraid I would be poor. Afraid I would end up with a life full of regret. So, she said the sentence that quietly redirected my future. The sentence millions of young people still hear today. She said, you should find a stable career first. At 26, that advice sounded wise, responsible, even loving. And that is the dangerous thing about the choices that shape our lives. They rarely arrive wearing the face of a mistake. They arrive wearing the face of good advice. So the next week, I did what many young men in Portland were doing at the time. I took a job as a junior accountant at a small insurance company downtown. I told myself it would only be temporary, just a few years, just long enough to build some security. Then I would return to painting. At least, that was the plan. What I didn't understand back then was how quietly time can move, how one practical decision can slowly become an entire life. And before I realized it, the brushes on my desk stopped moving. The office was on 3rd Avenue, in a gray brick building that looked exactly like what it was. A place where quiet men worked quiet jobs. Inside, everything moved in small, careful rhythms, typewriters clicking, phones ringing softly, the steady rustle of paper moving from one desk to another. My desk sat near a window. From there, I could see the street below, buses stopping, people walking with umbrellas, the slow pulse of the city going about its ordinary day. At first, the job felt temporary, just something sensible, a way to earn money while I figured out the rest of my life. I told myself, just a few years. But life has a quiet way of turning short plans into long decades. A few years became 10, 10 became 20. Before I understood what was happening, I had been sitting at that same desk for most of my adult life. The strange thing is, nothing about that life looked like failure. I had a steady paycheck. I bought a small house in southeast Portland. I drove a modest Chevrolet that started every morning. On paper, I was doing exactly what a responsible man was supposed to do. People respected that. Neighbors called me reliable. Coworkers called me dependable. My mother called me smart for choosing stability. And maybe they were right, because stability does something powerful. It removes fear. Bills get paid. Food stays on the table. Life becomes predictable. But there's another side to stability that no one talks about. It can slowly put your dreams to sleep. Not with one dramatic moment, not with some painful decision, just quietly, 1 year at a time. At first, I still painted on weekends, then only once in a while, then only when inspiration returned. Eventually, the brushes stayed in a drawer, the paints dried in their tubes, and the canvas in the corner of my room stayed blank. I didn't notice the change right away, because life was busy. Work demanded attention. Responsibilities filled the calendar. Days became weeks, weeks became years, and somewhere along the way, the young man who wanted to be a painter quietly disappeared. Yet the world kept telling me I was doing well. Promotions came slowly. My salary grew. My savings account looked respectable. From the outside, my life looked successful. But every morning, while shaving in the mirror, I would sometimes pause and stare at the reflection looking back at me. And a strange thought would appear, a thought I never said out loud. I would look at that man in the mirror and wonder, when did we stop becoming who we wanted to be? That question followed me quietly for many years. But I kept working, kept saving, kept living the safe life everyone approved of. Until one afternoon, when I was 52 years old, something happened that forced me to see people differently. It involved the person I trusted more than almost anyone, my closest friend, Daniel Brooks. Daniel Brooks and I met when we were 12 years old. We grew up in the same Portland neighborhood. We rode the same school bus, played baseball in the same dusty field behind Jefferson High. Daniel was the kind of friend you assume will always be there, the kind of person who knows your childhood stories, your embarrassing mistakes, your quiet dreams. By the time we were adults, life had taken us in slightly different directions. But somehow, we ended up working in the same insurance company downtown. We would eat lunch together almost every day. Same corner diner, same coffee, same conversations about work, family, and the future. If someone had asked me back then who I trusted most outside my family, I would have said Daniel without hesitation. Then one afternoon, something strange happened. My manager called me into his office. He closed the door. That alone made my stomach tighten. He sat down slowly and looked at me in a way I had never seen before, careful, uncertain. Then he said, "William, there have been some concerns raised about your work." I remember feeling confused. My work had always been clean, accurate, reliable. So I asked him what he meant, and that's when he told me something I will never forget. He said someone had reported that I had been making accounting mistakes, serious ones, mistakes that could damage the company. For a moment, the room felt very quiet, because I knew something immediately. Those mistakes didn't exist. And there was only one person in the office who had access to the fields being questioned: Daniel. Later that evening, I confronted him, not with anger, just with confusion. I asked him directly, "Did you say those things about me?" For a moment, he avoided my eyes, then he sighed and rubbed his forehead. And quietly, he admitted it. The promotion we had both been waiting for was coming up. Only one person could get it. He had convinced management that I had become careless, that I was slowing down, that the company needed someone younger and sharper. That someone was him. I remember standing there in the hallway outside the office, looking at a man I had known for 40 years, and suddenly realizing I didn't know him at all. The strange thing is, the betrayal itself wasn't what hurt the most. What hurt was the realization that I had believed something that wasn't true. I had believed that loyalty lasted forever, that friendship guaranteed honesty, that the people closest to you would always protect you. But standing there in that hallway, I understood something for the first time. Human beings are not heroes in each other's stories. They are simply people. People who get scared. People who get ambitious. People who sometimes choose themselves. That moment didn't destroy my career, but it did destroy an illusion I had carried since childhood. And once that illusion breaks, you begin to see the world differently. That was the first time I started asking a deeper question, a question that eventually led me to an unexpected place. A small bookstore in Portland, and a Roman emperor who had been dead for nearly 2,000 years. A few weeks after the incident with Daniel, I took a walk through downtown Portland. It was late afternoon. The sky was gray, the way it often is in Oregon. Rain hung in the air, but hadn't quite started yet. My mind felt heavy, not because of the promotion. I had already made peace with that. What bothered me was something deeper. The feeling that I had misunderstood people my entire life. I had believed loyalty was permanent, that love guaranteed wisdom, that the people closest to you could safely guide your life. But the world had just shown me something different. So I kept walking until I reached a small bookstore I used to visit years earlier. The kind of place that smelled like old paper and dust. I stepped in. A bell above the door rang softly. There were only two other people in the store, one browsing quietly, one reading behind the counter. I wandered through the aisles without any real purpose. Past history, past travel, past thick novels I knew I would never finish. Then I stopped in front of a narrow shelf labeled Philosophy. Most of the names meant nothing to me, but one thin book I caught beside. The cover was simple, just a name, Marcus Aurelius. I had never heard of him before, but something about the quiet simplicity of that book made me pick it up. Marcus Aurelius was a Roman emperor, a man who ruled one of the largest empires in human history. Yet the book wasn't about power. It was a collection of private thoughts he had written to himself nearly 2,000 years ago. I bought the book and took it home. That night, after dinner, I sat at my kitchen table and began reading. The first few pages were quiet observations, thoughts about patience, thoughts about time, thoughts about human weakness. Then I reached a sentence that made me stop. I read it twice. Marcus wrote something simple but powerful. He said, "You have power over your mind, not over outside events." I sat there staring at that sentence for a long time, because suddenly something in my life began to make sense. All those years, I had trusted other people to guide my choices. My mother, my boss, my closest friend. But Marcus Aurelius was suggesting something different, something almost uncomfortable. He was saying the only thing truly under your control is your own mind. Not other people, not their approval, not their loyalty, not even their love. For most of my life, I had believed happiness would come from doing the right things for the right people. But sitting there in that quiet kitchen, reading the words of a man who had lived 2,000 years earlier, I began to see the mistake. The mistake wasn't trusting people. Trust is part of being human. The mistake was allowing other people to steer the direction of my life. And once you realize that difference, something inside you begins to shift. But by the time I understood that truth, I was already an old man. The moment that proved it to me happened years later in the basement of my own house. I retired when I was 67. After more than 4 decades in the same office, I packed my desk into a cardboard box and walked out of the building for the last time. My coworkers shook my hand. Someone brought a cake. There were polite speeches about dedication and loyalty. It was a good farewell, respectful, kind. But when I stepped outside onto the sidewalk that afternoon, I felt something strange. Not sadness, not relief. Something quieter than that. It felt like the end of a long chapter I had never meant to write. The first few years of retirement passed calmly. I read more, walked through the parks along the Willamette River, spent time fixing small things around the house. Life slowed down. For the first time in decades, my schedule belonged entirely to me. Then one afternoon, when I was about 70, I went down into the basement to clean. Basements are strange places. They collect pieces of your life you've forgotten about. Old furniture, boxes of letters, photographs from decades ago. Near the back wall, behind a stack of dusty storage bins, I found a small wooden box I didn't immediately recognize. It took a moment before the memory returned. That box had followed me through 3 different homes, and I had never opened it. I brushed the dust from the lid and lifted it slowly. Inside were several old canvases, rolled sketches, a few dried tubes of paint. My paintings. For a long time I just stood there in the quiet basement, holding one of those canvases under the dim light. It was a landscape of Mount Hood, snow on the peaks, soft orange sunlight across the sky. I remembered painting it late one evening when I was 26, back when the future still felt wide open. And that's when the realization hit me, not slowly, not gently, all at once. I hadn't touched a paintbrush in over 40 years. 40 years. I tried to remember the exact moment when painting disappeared from my life, but there was no single moment. No dramatic decision. No final goodbye. Just small delays, small responsibilities, small practical choices. And over time, those small choices quietly buried a dream. I sat down on an old wooden stool in that basement and held the painting in my hands. The colors had faded slightly, but the energy of that young man was still there. And suddenly, I understood something painful. The person who painted this picture believed he had his whole life ahead of him. The man holding it now was already near the end. What made the moment even heavier was another realization. My mother, the person I had tried so hard to make proud, had passed away 15 years earlier. She never knew how much I had sacrificed to follow her advice. And by then, it no longer mattered. That was the afternoon I finally understood something many people only realize when it's far too late. The people who shape your decisions today may not even be there when you face the consequences tomorrow. That realization stayed with me for years. Quiet, heavy, unavoidable. And it was exactly the lesson I tried to explain to Emily that night in the hospital room. When I finished telling that story, Emily was very quiet. She sat there beside my hospital bed, staring at the floor, thinking. Young people often believe older people talk too much, but sometimes silence is the most honest response. After a minute, she looked up and asked me something simple. She said, "So, should I stop trusting people?" I shook my head, because that wasn't the lesson at all. Life becomes very lonely if you decide no one deserves your trust, and loneliness is not wisdom. What I told her was something different, something much more subtle. I said, "Emily, people don't give you bad advice because they want to harm you. They give you bad advice because they are speaking from their own fears." My mother loved me deeply. I never doubted that for a moment. But when she looked at my paintings on that wall in 1956, she didn't see my dream. She saw the memory of empty kitchens during the Great Depression. She saw cold winters without enough money. She saw hunger. Her advice wasn't cruel, it was protective. The same thing was true for Daniel. Even his betrayal came from something human. Fear, ambition, the quiet pressure people feel when they believe there isn't enough success for everyone. When you live long enough, you begin to understand something important about human beings. Everyone is carrying invisible battles. Everyone is shaped by experiences you cannot see. Everyone is trying in their own imperfect way to survive. That means their advice, their opinions, their expectations are never neutral. They are filtered through the story of their own life. Some people speak from courage, others speak from fear. Most people don't even realize which one they're doing. I looked at Emily and said something I wish someone had told me when I was young. Love the people in your life. Listen to them. But never forget something important. Love is an emotion. It is not a compass. She frowned slightly when I said that, so I explained. Your parents can love you deeply and still misunderstand who you are. Your friends can care about you and still be afraid of the risks you want to take. Even the people who support you the most are still human, still uncertain, still influenced by their own past. That's why one of the most dangerous things you can do in life is hand over the steering wheel of your future to someone else's fears. I leaned back into the pillow and watched the rain sliding down the window. Then I told her the idea that finally brought peace into my life, the idea I discovered in that little philosophy book years ago. Marcus Aurelius called it something simple. He called it the inner fortress. Emily leaned forward when I said those words. The inner fortress. I nodded, because that idea had taken me a long time to understand. Marcus Aurelius believed that every person must build a place inside their own mind, a place that belongs only to them, not to their parents, not to their friends, not to the expectations of the world. A place where decisions are made quietly, carefully, honestly. He called that place a fortress, not made of stone or walls, but made of clarity. Because life will always bring storms. People will disappoint you, circumstances will change, opportunities will appear and disappear. If your peace depends on those things staying stable, you will spend your entire life feeling anxious. But if you build that inner fortress, something remarkable happens. You begin to understand that other people cannot live your life for you, and they cannot carry the weight of your choices either. Your parents cannot wake up every morning with the consequences of your decisions. Your friends cannot lie awake at night with your regrets. Only you can do that. That is why the responsibility for your direction must always remain in your own hands. I told Emily something that took me nearly 70 years to fully understand. People can walk beside you in life. They can support you. They can even love you deeply. But no one else should be holding the map. For a moment the room was quiet again. The rain outside had grown heavier. Emily looked thoughtful, not sad, just thoughtful. Then she asked a question many people secretly wonder about. She said, "What if I make the wrong choice?" I smiled a little when she said that, because that fear never really disappears. Not at 24, not at 40, not even at 95. So I told her the truth. You will make wrong choices. Everyone does. But there's something far worse than making a mistake. It's living a life where every major decision was made by someone else. Because mistakes can teach you. Mistakes can strengthen you. Mistakes can even redirect you toward something better. But a life lived to satisfy everyone else creates a different kind of pain. The quiet kind, the kind that appears late at night when everything else is silent. And when that moment comes, there is no one else left in the room to share the regret. Only you. I could see she understood, because her eyes had that same look I once saw in the mirror, the look of someone beginning to question the direction of their own life. So before the night ended, I told her one last thing, the one lesson I wish I had understood when I was 26 years old. The hospital room had grown very quiet. The rain outside had slowed to a soft drizzle. Somewhere down the hallway, a cart rolled past with a faint metallic rattle. Emily was still sitting beside my bed, listening carefully. I could see the questions moving through her mind, the same questions every young person eventually faces. What kind of life should I live? Who should I listen to? What if I disappoint the people I love? Those questions feel enormous when you are young because you believe every decision will define the rest of your life. But when you reach 95, you begin to see those choices differently. Most people spend their youth trying to avoid failure, trying to choose the safest road, trying to satisfy the expectations around them. But safety has a hidden cost. Sometimes the safest path slowly moves you away from the person you were meant to become. I told Emily something that took me most of my life to understand. Your family wants you to be safe. Your friends want you to be comfortable. The world wants you to be predictable. But your soul wants something entirely different. It wants growth, curiosity, the chance to explore the strange, uncertain possibilities of life. Those things are rarely live on the safest road. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand. My fingers are not as steady as they used to be, but the message mattered. I said, Emily, love your family. Spend time with them. Listen to their advice. But when the moment comes to choose your direction, Step into the quiet room inside your own mind. Close the door and listen to the voice that belongs only to you. Because in the end, there's a simple truth about life that many people try to avoid. You will share your happiness with others. You will share meals, laughter, and memories. But your choices, your deepest regrets, your sense of meaning, those things are carried by you alone. Emily nodded slowly. I could see she understood more than she expected to that night. And before she left the room, I gave her one final piece of advice, not as a warning, but as a gift from someone who had seen how quickly life passes. I said, one day you will wake up as an old woman, maybe not 95 like me, but old enough to look back at your life clearly. And when that day comes, you will meet the person who lived every one of your decisions. That person will be you. So live a life that version of you will recognize with pride. Because time, my young friend, moves far faster than anyone expects. Okay, in Detroit, a quiet truth. After I finished speaking, Emily didn't say anything for a while. She just sat there beside my bed, watching the rain slide slowly down the hospital window. Sometimes the most important ideas need silence before they can take root. Finally, she stood up and leaned over to hug me. It was a gentle hug, careful, the way people hug someone they know is fragile. Before she left the room, she said something simple. Thank you, Grandpa. Then the door closed quietly behind her, and the room returned to silence. At 95, you spend a lot of time thinking about the past. Not because you want to live there, but because the past is full of lessons that only become clear with time. If I could speak to the young man I once was, the one standing in that small room in Portland with paint on his hands, I would tell him something very simple. Love the people in your life. Treasure them. Laugh with them. Forgive them when they fail you. But never forget one quiet truth. No one else can live your life for you. Not your parents, not your friends, not the expectations of the world. Those voices may surround you. They may speak loudly. They may even sound wise. But there is only one voice that will stay with you from the first day of your life until the very last. Your own. So learn to listen to it, protect it, trust it. Because the life you are building right now will eventually become the memories you live with forever. And when the world finally grows quiet around you, when the nights become long and the room is still, you will meet the person who lived every one of your choices. Make sure that person is someone you are proud to know. Take care of your mind, my young friend. Time is shorter than you think.